Hello, I'm Dr. Angie McCartney.
And I'm Ruth McCartney.
Welcome to TeaFlix,
where each episode's intimate conversation features a fascinating guest across the spectrum of Beatles world, pop culture, Grammy winners, the music industry, chefs, producers, music stars, actors, and more. So bottoms up and join us as they spill the tea on TeaFlix. And we are live once again.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm a little less live than you are, but it's hoping.
I don't know about that. Well, today, happy Tuesday, April the 7th today, kids. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for all of your birthday wishes for Martin for this past weekend. Today, we have a fascinating young man and a book. We've been fighting each other over the book. I actually went and got the digital version so we could read it together. Introduced by none other than our dear friend Buzz Bazzini from the BeatlesBookstore.com. Jim joked that Buzz is the associate producer of today's episode, so there you go. Jim Windolf is our guest today, and he's an American journalist and author known for his work in magazines and his writing about major cultural figures like the Beatles and Bob Dylan in this particular episode. He's a features editor at the New York Times. He's published articles, reviews, essays, and humor pieces in Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, New York Magazine, Rolling Stone, and many others. Additionally, his short fiction has appeared in Ontario Review, 3 a.m. Magazine, Puerto del Sol, ta-da, and other literary journals. His writing is known for being insightful, well-researched, I can guarantee you that, and accessible to general readers. He's not only known for this definitive brand new book, Where the Music Had to Go, published on the 14th by Simon & Schuster. This is a must-have for any self-respecting Beatle fans collection, which is about these artists, Dylan and the Beatles, and many, many quotes from many, many others. But also for Jim's contributions in magazine features and essays, which have helped interpret their enduring influence. This dual biography dives into the surprisingly supportive, occasionally rivalrous, and always fertile relationship between Bob Dylan and the Beatles, uncovering how they inspired and transformed each other as songwriters, recording artists, and cultural icons. From Dylan's initial dismissal of the Beatles as being for teeny boppers, to his realization that they were pointing the direction where the music had to go, hence the title. And from the Beatles' obsessive spinning of early Dylan records to their impromptu renditions of 15 Dylan songs during the 1969 Get Back sessions, this book captures the moments that pushed Dylan to go electric and inspired the Beatles to deepen their lyrics. Highly entertaining and packed with backstage anecdotes, Where the Music Had to Go is a deep focused portrait of a heretofore unexamined relationship, one full of camaraderie, competition, and mutual evolution. More than a music biography, this is a front row seat to the forces that shaped an era, an unmissable experience for music lovers, pop culture buffs, and anyone curious about the magic that happens when legends collide. So thanks to Buzz Bazzini, and without further ado, the author of Where the Music Had to Go, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jim Windolf.
Thank you for that kind introduction. Hello, Dr. Angie and Ruth. I'm exhausted from the introduction. It was so too nice.
Did you? Now, this latest book of yours, Where the Music Had to Go, explores major shifts in music culture. What first marked your idea for the project? Well, how did you get started on it?
Well, I think it's just from, first of all, just being a fan of both. And not, as you know, not everybody who likes Bob Dylan likes the Beatles, and not everybody who likes the Beatles like Bob Dylan. But since I was a kid, I liked both. So I kept reading about both. And when I would read these books about them, I'd always feel a little ripped off that when they met each other or that kind of thing, there wasn't enough detail. And then I found out in my research that earlier writers just missed a lot of the story that the many times they saw each other the story had not been told. So it's kind of just the book I wanted to read. So I spent 5 years writing it so I could read it.
You want a job doing, do it yourself.
Yeah, that's right.
That is amazing. I mean, you're right. I'm of course, a Beatle fan. As a former recovering lyricist, I appreciate Dylan for his poetry, but not really a fan of the audio, I have to say. So you're right when you say often it's not taken for granted that if you're a fan of one, you'll be a fan of the other.
That's right. George even said that the first interview that George and John gave about the Beatles was to Melody Maker in 1965. And George said, people might be surprised to hear that we're fans of Dylan because, maybe some of our fans don't like Dylan, but we do. And so that's been the case from the very start.
Yeah.
But a lot of people like both at the very start, including, like the Byrds and Sonny and Cher and all these people who kind of tried to mix the two sounds in their own music. Yeah.
Do you think it was maybe more exposure to the people who were fans of both from the beginning were exposed to both of them at the beginning? Because, we didn't really get a lot of Dylan on the radio in England, but in America, you would have had access. Both would have been more accessible, wouldn't they?
A little bit more, but when Dylan first arrives, his first big tour of England in April and May 1965, I was surprised to see how he was in the charts. So his album was at number one. He had four albums in the top 20, and his old stuff was, his old songs from 2 years earlier were in the top 10. So he was surprisingly kind of a pop star. He was even in teen magazines back then. So people forget that now. It's hard to imagine Dylan in a teen magazine, but he was. And there's Dylan and Lennon on the cover of a magazine called Teen Set in the same issue. So back then he was for a couple years there, kind of a pop star.
That's interesting because he's not exactly the pinup, the David Cassidy,
Right.
Donny Osmond type. But you're right. In the 60s, there were a lot of sort of beatniks who crocheted and knitted their own sweaters out of dark green wool to match their MGs, and we're all just peace and love and hippie stuff. And then there was the rest of us, psychedelic kids, right? But you didn't discover Dylan until you were what, 11 or 12?
That's right. Yep. So
How did that come about?
I don't know. It was the song Hurricane was a minor hit when I was about 11 years old. So I don't know if you know that song, but it's about the boxer Reuben Hurricane Carter, who was unjustly imprisoned for murder. And that song, really, it was the music of it that caught my ear. So I didn't really get the lyrics until I'd listened to it a while. And I was already a Beatles fan, and through being a solo Beatles fan, because I was a 70s kid. So I first, I had Band on the Run and George's album 33 and a Third and the Lennon compilation Shaved Fish. That was really my entry. And then I went backward into the Beatles albums from there. So I kind of simultaneously as a kid was a fan of all of them individually.
Yeah, that's interesting that you sort of went chronologically backwards. Because I was in the eye of the hurricane, as it were.
Right.
But from 1964, when Angie married my dad, when Jim McCartney. So, I was always exposed to it chronologically. But we've had a lot of authors on who, like, Rubber Soul was their very first experience, and they didn't do the sort of toe tapping four on the floor stuff till much later. It's interesting how different people come to the Beatles, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, you know those albums, they're called the Red and the Blue albums, those kind of greatest hits albums. So they came out in 1973 when I was 9 years old, and those were huge. And I think a lot of people my age, that's how we became Beatles fans. And those albums were Alan Klein's idea. So for all the bad he might have done, at least he might have created another generation of Beatles fans with those two albums.
Well, I think he was one of the first in the music business to try and get more juice from the same orange, right? And so
that's right.
He was the re-release king.
Yeah.
And everybody in those days used to sort of frown on a greatest hits because they would say, "Oh, the fans have already spent the money; they've already bought it; they're not going to buy it twice." Well,
right.
Fool me once.
Now it's hard to buy an album that doesn't have, the fourth version that we didn't release at the time. Now it's almost confusing, I think, when people get albums now because there's so many alternate tracks. It's like when you're buying a Charlie Parker album or something, you've got alternate take 4, and sometimes I just want to hear the original album and that's it,
Exactly.
Yeah. And the title, Where the Music Had to Go, it's intriguing, isn't it? What does it mean to you on a deeper level?
I mean, why did you choose that Dylan quote for the title?
Yeah, because Dylan started out not liking the Beatles. So when he first heard he did listen to pop radio stations in New York in early 1964. And then about a month later, after he dismissed them, he said, they're for teeny boppers. And then he was on a road trip in a station wagon with 3 other guys. And he heard their songs blasting out of the radio. And suddenly it made sense to him. And
Oh,
he described that moment to somebody a few years later, and he said, "I realized they were pointing the direction where music had to go." So it's no accident that he soon straps on an electric guitar about a year later. So it's really the key moment to me of when the two things came together. You know, that's and they both were, and then the Beatles took their music to a place that was more Dylan-esque after they became fans of Dylan's.
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, did your research for this book change the way you listen to not just their music, but other people's music? Do you sort of look at it and go, well, the zeitgeist was this, and maybe this song was, revolving around something in history or a certain person, or
Yeah, and you can really hear how other bands of the time are trying to fuse the two sounds, which becomes known as folk rock. But it's really interesting if you really get deep into those years, 64, 5, and 6. The Byrds, Sonny and Cher. One thing that made me laugh was how much the Beatles and Dylan both had friendships and interactions with Tiny Tim. If you're
Oh,
and some of your yeah, so they genuinely liked him. Tiny
yeah.
Tim spent time at Bob Dylan's house. There's film footage of Tiny Tim there that I saw at the Bob Dylan Center. And
Yeah.
then right after George Harrison spends Thanksgiving with Dylan in '68, they wrote songs together during that time. He goes to New York, and Tiny Tim is in an apartment in New York with George Harrison recording for the Beatles' Christmas album that year when he sings "Nowhere Man," and
for
and
that.
part of Tiny Tim's act back then was to do Dylan's "Like a Rolling Stone" and the Beatles' "Nowhere Man" back to back in his show. He did it at the Albert Hall for a standing ovation in '65.
That
So
shows
people
us
forget it. Yeah, yeah. So everybody around them is kind of taking bits of Dylan and the Beatles into their own act, and
yeah.
the Byrds did it, maybe less amusingly than Tiny Tim, but and other groups too, not to the present day, but for many years after that.
What a character. I wonder if Miss Vicky is still a thing. Didn't he marry her on, was it the Jack Parr show or the Johnny Carson
Yeah,
show?
it was on Johnny Carson on the Tonight Show. It was one of the biggest ratings events of
Tiny Tim and Miss Vicky. He was
yeah.
he was kind of the Weird Al of his day, wasn't he?
Yeah, he really was, and he loved this old stuff. He loved music from the 20s and 30s. And when he was a little kid, it's just because his parents were a lot older than he was, and they had actually a gramophone in his house. He grew up in Manhattan, and so when other kids are listening to rock and roll, he's listening to Rudy Valley and stuff like that. And the thing that he didn't know, but Dylan and Paul and all those, they knew that stuff too. They loved that stuff as
My
much
dad.
as Tiny Tim did. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
very funny. Yeah.
That is funny. I shot a
And you,
pizza.
and you remember the song Winchester Cathedral at that
Oh,
time. That was,
absolutely.
so it's the kind of the same moment where that old stuff was coming back for a minute.
And then Winchester Cathedral, I think, was co-opted by Peter Cook and Dudley Moore.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember they did it at the Edinburgh Festival? And I think it was a BBC radio play hit for Pete and Dud. And that was the way it was.
Yeah.
So Tiny Tim was huge in UK
England,
pop culture.
Yeah.
And when I got here, I was working for a photographer and now director called Norman Seif, who's an incredible photographer. He's photographed everybody. And he was directing Pizza Hut commercials. And so I got to work on a Pizza Hut show, Pizza Hut commercial with Tiny Tim.
Oh.
And I was the food stylist, and I had to make a ukulele-shaped pizza that he had to play until the cheese fell off.
That's great.
He was as sweet as he could be, but just what an unlikely celebrity, huh?
Dude, he really was. And the thing that made me laugh was just that, I only mention it because it's one of these unexpected things that who knew that Dylan and Paul and John and George too, were all interacting with Tiny Tim right around the same time, and it's just funny.
That's right.
Yeah.
Our friend Karen Reeder from Edinburgh in Scotland, who, by the way, your tea is on the way, Karen. He is saying the Beatles and Dylan both connect to Marlene Dietrich. Paul McCartney used to sing Dietrich's signature song "Falling in Love Again," Can't Help It, during the band's residency in Hamburg, and Dietrich sang "Die Antwort weiß ganz allein der Wind." The answer only knows the wind only knows. Do you know if Dylan was a fan of Dietrich? And of course, both Dylan and Dietrich are on the Sgt. Pepper cover.
Oh, yes.
That's a great question. I don't know. I mean, Dylan loves old music, but I don't know any particular connection between him and Dietrich. I'd have to look it up. It wouldn't shock me, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I think Nico did a Dietrich song, and Dylan was close with Nico, so I'm sure he was aware of Dietrich, but I don't know anything specific.
Yeah, that is amazing. So, was there a particular moment in your discovery outside of Tiny Tim that really took you aback when you were doing your 5 years research? Is there one particular standout moment that just shocked you when you discovered it?
I don't know if it's a shock, but it was close, a surprise at least. How much Dylan thought about the Beatles through his entire life. So, my book begins in 2009 with him visiting John Lennon's childhood home as a tourist. But there are other things where in 1985, he plays Come Together with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Oh, yeah.
In 1990 at a concert, he played Nowhere Man. In 2004, he's one of Dylan's famous songs, Tears of Rage. He starts singing it to he starts adding new lyrics that mention Strawberry Field and Penny Lane.
Oh.
And this happened, and then he records a Paul song in 2014. And so it's something that I think people know that Dylan influenced how John and Paul wrote lyrics and helped George become a songwriter, but they may not realize how deep Dylan's affection for the Beatles ran. And it's just something that stayed there through his whole life.
Speaking of Dylan and Paul, how on earth did you get your hands on this letter that Paul wrote to Bob Dylan, which is featured in the book?
That letter I found at the Bob Dylan Center archive, and it was there in Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan saved it. That's what that means. And then I asked, and kindly the Paul McCartney team allowed us to reprint it. So I got permission from the Dylan archive as well as. And if you look in those same picture right before that picture, you can see the picture of Bob Dylan on the Teen magazine. Maybe show the viewers that, because that's so funny.
Oh yeah, okay.
It's on the right-hand page, I think.
Okay. New York Classic. Oh yeah, Teen Set. We actually had the author of today's Teen Set on the show a few months ago.
Yes, he's great. Yeah, there they are, Dylan and Lennon on the cover of Teen Set. Yeah, that's Alison Bumstead wrote a book about Teen Set. She's very good. That's a really good book. Yeah.
She was a great guest on here. But if I'm going to read this letter so that for the benefit of the viewers and listeners. So it's dated the 6th of May, 2009. And it's just on a letterhead that says Paul McCartney, and he's put brackets in pen around the McCartney. Dear Bob, just had the pleasure of listening to your theme time radio show, Friends and Neighbors, and enjoyed it so much that I had to write and tell you. The music you played was fabulous, and the chat in between was both edifying and amusing. Thanks for an hour of listening pleasure. Hope all is well with you. All the best, you lovely boy. Cheers, Paul. Isn't that sweet?
That's very sweet.
Yeah.
And then Sir Paul, gave me an interview for this book, and he mentions hanging out with Dylan in 2016 when they played a desert trip in California. So they had, their relationship continued, and he said he's open to writing songs with Bob even now. And people might think that's ridiculous, but we all know that Paul just put out an album, so it's not ridiculous. And I think Dylan will keep going too.
Yeah,
yeah. Creativity never. If you're a creative soul, it's not like Angie's on her 8th book and I'm still writing songs. But
I didn't start till I was nearly 83 years old.
That's right, 82.7. It says on the book.
On my first.
That's good.
It's a never say never thing. So speaking of writing and creativity going on and on.
Yeah. You've spent years and years as a writer for publications like Variety and Rolling Stone and Vanity Fair and all those high-end publications. How did your editorial background shape the way you approached this book?
Well, I think it is just after writing so many words, I think, one thing that you get it in your head when you're writing especially for the New York Times, which is aimed at everybody. It's meant to be, you want something that you write in the New York Times that any smart reader who may not know the subject you're writing about to understand perfectly what you're writing about. So I try to write something that is not for the specialist reader, and just always keep in mind that, even if you are an expert in one part of music, it might not mean that you know the other part. So I'm keeping in mind that the Beatles fans reading this book may not know anything about Dylan at all. So I want to make it crystal clear,
Yes.
that stuff, and vice versa. And I always think writing's better that way because it just makes things more clear if you're not writing for insiders. If you write if you have a welcoming tone to bring in everybody and make sure that, everything's clear. So I think
Yes.
just clarity. And also, when you write for these publications, you have to get your facts right, or you'll be sued and you'll be fired. So you also learn how to be accurate.
Hashtag consequences.
Yes, yeah,
Which seem to be missing in lots of places these days, but we won't go there.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny. George Harrison, a fascinating quote to me, one that stood out. George is quoted in your book as saying that he thought John's Norwegian Wood was to George, very obviously a Bob Dylan song. And then afterwards, Dylan's song, Fourth Time Around, seemed to be the same kind of structure. Does it strike you as such as the listener?
yes, I think those two songs are very much alike. And I think Dylan wrote the song Fourth Time Around as a message to the Beatles, and especially to John, to say, like, get out of my territory. It's a little too close. So he we call it trolling. They didn't have that word back then, but Dylan is trolling the Beatles by taking the melody of Norwegian Wood and writing his own song, which has the same basic scenario. Norwegian Wood is about a night gone wrong between a couple, and so is Fourth Time Around. And even the first night Dylan played that song, another guy in his band said, "This sounds so much like Norwegian Wood. What are you doing?" And Dylan said, "I'm afraid Norwegian Wood sounds like my stuff, so I feel I have to do this." And when Dylan played that song in concert in England that year, the year that it came out, I went back to the old music papers, and it wasn't yet on an album, so the critics would say, and then Dylan seemed to play the Beatles' Norwegian Wood, and if the Beatles were in the audience tonight, they would have been flattered or maybe embarrassed to hear his version of their song. So it was so close that critics thought maybe this is Norwegian Wood. So
that's wild. You see, it's about you say it's about a night gone wrong between a couple. I thought it was about a hooker in a bathtub, but what do I know? I was only there at the time.
Yeah, it could be that. Could be that.
Could be that too. Yeah, Diana's just saying, and I agree, books are windows to the world for sure. What a great way of putting it. I'm so glad books are still a thing. I mean, I know we have them digitally, but do you see a renaissance of like book collectors and you're doing a lot of events? It's on the Simon & Schuster website. Do you see a renaissance of people now they're collecting vinyl? They want the companion in the book to sit and read while they listen to the records. And
yeah, interestingly enough, the same thing has not, what happened in music where everything went to streaming and to Spotify.
right.
It hasn't quite happened in books. I mean, Kindle's popular and that is popular, but the sales of hardcover books and paperbacks has held steady in recent years, and it just seems that people like having a book in their hand, and they want to get away from their screen at least for a few hours a day. So I think the digital thing has had a dent in the publishing industry, but not quite as much as it had in music.
Yeah, I've never looked at it like that because, Spotify are the robber barons. Apple, when iTunes came along, we all thought, well, this is great because to buy an album in those days was $10 or $12, and you got the single and maybe one more song you liked, and then, filler basically with most bands, not with the Beatles for sure, but then Steve Jobs came along and said, well, you can buy them for 99 cents as singles. And they sold a lot more because people would go and, create their own playlists. And out of that, Apple would pay the label 70 cents. And then the label would keep, 15 or 20% for currency conversion and what have you. And the bands were making 58, 59 cents per download. Now Spotify's paying them 0.003 cents per play. And so, we used to have acts that we would write them a check for $4,000 a month. Now you're lucky if it's $400 a quarter. And so I'm so glad to hear you say that, that's not happening as prevalently in book world, because even if you want it on your Kindle, you still pay for it. You don't want to just rent it page by page and go back to it and have, one page at a time. It's kind of crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, why people would want to do that. Ange had a question about turning the clock back. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, of course. What question would you have asked as a journalist if you'd been sort of, in the Delmonico Hotel with the boys in August 28th, 1964, when they all got together and smoked jazz cigarettes, I believe.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. Um,
With
well, you know
towels
what?
under the
I'm gonna
door.
Yeah.
yeah. um, well, I'd like to know, there was there's one account where there's Dylan's right hand man is this guy named Victor Maimudis, and he wrote in his memoir many years later that the Beatles and Dylan took turns going to the window because the thousands of people on the street below would you know, let up a cheer whenever they approached the window. So they said it was kind of like playing a musical instrument to walk to the window and back and forth. And I'd just like to hear more detail on that, and if it was really how it happened. You know, that's what they did the morning after. So they were all crashed out, and then in the morning they all went to the window, and they were surprised to see thousands of people still on the sidewalks below. And the noise, they said the noise was incredible.
Wow. Our friend Ashley from Alabama is asking, wasn't Norwegian Wood supposed to be based around the relationship between John Lennon and Alma Cogan at that time? I don't know. Do you know anything about that
Ooh.
background?
Yes, I have thoughts on this that I go into in the book. So they're really John wrote this song, and it's about, he says in a way it's about an affair, but on the other hand, if you look at the lyrics closely, it's about an affair that didn't quite happen because the male character is rejected. So there are three suspects, or three possible models for the woman in the song, and one is Alma Cogan for sure. And John was very close with Alma Cogan, and Alma Cogan's sister gave an interview in 2006 to the BBC where she said that Alma and John would check into hotels together under the names Mr. and Mrs. Winston, and they had quite an affair. And Cynthia Lennon believed that that was true. In her second memoir, she writes about her feelings of jealousy toward Alma Cogan. So she's definitely a possibility.
Oh.
There's another thing in my book where Alma is in a hotel room with Dylan and the Beatles and Cynthia Lennon and Allen Ginsberg, partying
Oh.
after one of Dylan's shows at the Royal Albert Hall. So she was also close with Paul. She's the person that Paul played Yesterday for early on before he had a title for it. But two other women are possibilities. The journalist Maureen Cleave,
Oh.
and that's the one mentioned by John's friend Pete Shotton. And then a third woman is named Sunny Freeman, who's the wife of Robert Friedman, the photographer, who told people she was from Norway, even though she was from Germany. So that's, some people thought the Norwegian was kind of a sly hint that it was about his affair with Sunny Freeman. And
Yeah.
there's other evidence that John had a dalliance with her. So it could be any one of those three. I don't think we can know for sure. John did say in an interview, it was about an affair I was having, but he didn't say who it was with. So I think all we can do is like, here are the three main possibilities, and leave it at that. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
You make mention in your book, there's a reference to Miles Davis, which is somebody that is, you don't really connect between Dylan and the Beatles. Your research must take you down crazy rabbit holes.
yeah, there's this journalist, Al Aronowitz. He introduced the Beatles to Bob Dylan, and he was friends first with Dylan, then with the Beatles. He wrote two really great cover stories on the Beatles for the Saturday Evening Post that were two of the first really good serious pieces in the United States about them. But he was friends with Miles Davis, and he learned to smoke pot from Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and Miles Davis, and he's the one who. It's not, people say Dylan turned the Beatles on to pot, but really Al Aronowitz had a lot to do with it too that night at the Delmonico.
Wow, that must have been quite the night. I mean, there are rooms and times and flies on the wall, but that would have been one of them. We lost our dear departed, lovely friend and journalist and writer Ivor Davis last week, and
Yes.
God rest his soul. What a lovely man.
Right.
And he was one of the very few people in the room the night the Beatles met Elvis. Can you imagine that? I mean,
Yeah, that's amazing.
it's a pinch yourself moment. But there are just so many, like the Chelsea Hotel. Our friend Elizabeth just stayed there. What an iconic place to have been in those years. Can you paint a picture for people who don't know anything about the Chelsea Hotel? Paint a picture of sort of the people who would hang out there and what that scene looked like.
Yeah, well, back then it was artists, poets, and the place was, kind of a dive, but a charming dive. Leonard Cohen was there. Dylan had a place there for a while. A lot of painters. Um, the Indian novelist R.K. Narayan lived there when he was in New York. Now it's a lovely hotel that costs about $450 a night to stay there, and there's still apartments there. I have a friend who has an apartment there, so I was there a few months ago. It still has kind of that atmosphere and mood there. It is a terrific place. The Beatles didn't see Dylan at the Chelsea Hotel. He was there after his '66 tour, the one where he was booed.
Right.
And he was in pretty bad shape, and he was there for about a month before he left to go up to Woodstock and live there for about 5 years after that.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there are just so many names in your book that are the reference. I'm surprised it only took you 5 years. I'm just going through the index. You know, you've got the Bentley Bows, Irving Berlin, Pete Best, Alf Bicknell, the chauffeur, who was an old friend of ours who used to rescue me when I was 5 years old out, backstage. He'd carry me aloft, or Mal Evans, because, the fan crush would inevitably happen
Rocking the car,
at the stage door and rocking the car.
That's amazing. Well,
Yeah.
poor Alf, there's a story I meant, because I want to show, a funny thing happens where the Beatles and Dylan both quit being on the road at the same time, because for similar reasons, really. Dylan had death threats mixed in with the booing and all that stuff. But there's a story at the Houston airport where the Beatles land at about 2 a.m. in Houston, and the fans charged the plane, and the pilots were afraid they were going to kill somebody, and they turned off the engines, these were propeller blades whirring. And then the plane came to a stop, and the fans leaped up on the wings and surrounded the plane, and the Beatles were stuck in there for 45 minutes. And when the Beatles came out, they didn't put a staircase up to the plane because they were afraid of the crowd. They put a special truck with a hydraulic lift, and Alf Bicknell was standing next to Paul, and the fans were so crazy they were throwing stuff. Even though they loved the Beatles, they were throwing stuff. And Alf Bicknell got hit in the head with a heavy lighter, and he almost went over the side, and Paul caught him. So I was just in the book. I just want to illustrate how rough it got on the tours for both Dylan and the Beatles that same year, and that's one story that I thought really illustrated that moment.
Well, we were at home one Sunday night in Heswell on Wirral, just outside Liverpool, sitting at the kitchen table, and we all just cleared up dinner, and we're all sitting having a cup of tea before bed, as you do, and we had these lead lighted little diamond shaped window panes. It was sort of not an old house, but it was mock Tudor, affectations. And we had a half an acre back garden, and there was a huge 8-foot hedgerow fence, and then just wildlife in the back. It's all houses now, but all of a sudden we're just sitting there having a cup of tea, and we hear this almighty crash, and there's hair and teeth and squealing and screaming, and the fans have got over the fence, rushed up the garden, broken in through the windows, and fallen into the sink in the house. And so fortunately we had very high up handles on the doors and locks. So Paul got everybody out of there, and we were all in the hallway by the stairs, and locked the door, and we called the police and said, "Can you come around and clean out the back garden, please?" And they were all just like bits of glass sticking in their hair. And it was just, they would do practically anything to get near a Beatle. It was just
They used
crazy.
to steal pebbles off the driveway.
Gravel.
Every now and again, we used to have to get the local garden service to come and repay the front drive.
Yeah.
Because this is a stone that Paul has driven over,
Oh, my Lord.
I know. It's just crazy.
One thing, I went to Liverpool during my research, and one thing that surprised me was, I don't know if you know this by name, but there's this, it's called the Clarence Warehouse. And do you know these photos of, the photos where the 1962, right after Ringo joined the Beatles, and they're standing in an abandoned lot with a huge warehouse. So interestingly, in '66, Dylan went to that exact spot to get his own picture taken. So he must have known, because that was a poster, of the Beatles standing in that spot. So he went to that exact same spot to get his photo taken. And I went there to check it out. And is probably more familiar to you, but I was surprised that the warehouse next to this abandoned warehouse that is still decrepit, the other ones are being transformed into luxury condominiums, because there's, that development is coming to that part of Liverpool.
Sure. And what Paul's release of his album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane, last week, Dungeon Lane used to lead down to, the Mersey shore, the sort of the cheap part.
It's called the Cast Iron Shore.
It's called the Cast Iron Shore
Yeah.
at Oglet, because people used to throw their old bicycles and bed frames and all kinds of crap into that part of the Mersey, because there was nobody down there. It's off Hale Road. And I love the way they leaked the album. They had a kid in a school cap. Everybody's seen the pictures by now. And long shorts, the old Liverpool Institute uniform. And he looks like he's stealing the sign, Dungeon Lane. And the MPL marketing department worked with Google Maps. And they took pictures with the Google Maps cars of this kid stealing the Dungeon Lane sign. And they just sort of leaked it out there and somehow got that coordinate in the algorithm. And people kept saying, well, where's Dungeon Lane? What's Dungeon Lane? And 48 hours later, the record comes out. They leaked it on Google Maps, which I thought was absolutely
good strategy.
Yeah. Ashley's saying that's the area where John's family first lived when they immigrated into Liverpool. That's right.
Oh yeah,
the old warehouses.
I'm curious about that. Do you know that 73 television special that Paul made called James Paul McCartney? Were you taking part in that? Because I love those scenes in the pubs.
She's in it. Yeah.
But I had dark hair. Not this isn't my real
No.
Was it a fun night?
Yeah, I suppose.
No. Okay.
Well, Paul had forgotten to take any money with him, so he had to touch my dad for the bill for the whole.
Yeah.
That was a big crowd that night.
There are several scenes where Paul's whispering in my dad's ear, and it's like, oh crap, I forgot my wallet. Can you cover this?
Oh yeah.
So, and I thought I was going, and I made a long green dress with a hood on it, and I sewed it on the machine, and I had these little suede wedge-heeled shoes, remember, with an ankle strap. And at the last minute, they'd given away, or they'd sold so many tickets.
But didn't they say you were too young anyway?
Yeah, but that's nonsense, because I was 13 or 14 years old, and you can go in pubs when you're a baby in England as long as you're not drinking until you're 16. And the news came down that the film crew had said, oh, I'm sorry, we've invited too many people and it's a fire hazard, you can't go. So I had to sit home all by myself.
Oh, that's too bad.
That was no good. But no, Ange went. She's actually in Man on the Run. About 2.5 minutes in, there's some pub scenes. You'll see Her Majesty. She's in there.
Oh, barely. If you blink your eyes, I was nearly on the
You look older then than you do now.
It's that California living makes you young.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's wild. What's Ashley saying? They also found all the kids were photographed with Dylan in the original photo and brought them back together after 50 years.
Oh.
Yeah, that's right. That place I was mentioning, when he went to that warehouse, there were about 9 or 10 kids on the street, and they made a documentary of the kids that he posed with that day.
Oh.
Brought them all back together about 5 years ago or so. It's very fun. You can find it, I think, on YouTube, documentary about those kids. So they didn't know who Dylan was at the time, but Dylan was just walking around that area by the docks and posed with these kids. And not only did he pose for still photos, but he had a film crew filming him. So at the Bob Dylan Center, they have the film footage of this photo shoot, which is fascinating to watch because it's Bob in Liverpool doing all this stuff. And that same day, Bill Harry took him to see the Cavern Club, which had just gone out of business.
Yep.
He met a guy named Dennis something who was rumored to have I'm not sure, not Dennis O'Dell, another guy who was rumored to have punched George in the eye in 61. Yeah. So anyway,
it's Liverpool. Many people punched many eyes in 1961.
But I was thinking Dylan might have been the first Beatles tourist, because now you go there and it's filled with Beatles tourists. And Dylan got one of the first tours with Bill Harry saying, here's where the Beatles did this and that. And, it's very funny.
When Paul first met Linda, right before they got married in March of 69, so it must have been, New Year, after Christmas, New Year of that year, he brought her up to Liverpool to meet us. And she said, well, where's this famous Cavern Club? And so he said, okay, well, we'll pop over, we'll go through the tunnel. Hey, Ruth, you want to come with? So Linda and I went, and Paul drove Angie's little yellow Rover car. And we went and we parked near Matthew Street and went down, and the cleaning lady was letting herself in. And she recognized Paul, it's 1969 by this time. And he said, "Hey, can I come in? I want to show my girlfriend. I've got my little stepsister with me. Can we come in?" And she said, "Oh, well, I'll just be. It's going to smell like Dettol, love, because I'll be washing the floors. It's going to be stinky down there. You know, I've got to get rid of the smell of cigarettes and beer." And so Linda and I literally sat in the wooden chairs in the cavern, and Paul got up and he played the drums, and there was a guitar there, and he gave Linda and I just this little concert. And then we, wandered down Matthew Street, and then we went to somewhere and bought a pair of Bang & Olufsen speakers, because he said the speakers we had at home were crap.
Didn't you go to the cathedral? One of the cathedrals.
We went to to Paddy's Wigwam. We went to the old cathedral, and we went up on, again, he used his Maca charm, and he took Linda and I up on the roof, so we had a full 360-degree view of Wirral, because it was a rare clear day when it wasn't pissing with rain.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, he wanted to give Linda, and then we went to the White Star for a sausage roll, because I think they were still eating meat in those days. It might have been a veggie roll, I don't know.
No, I don't think it would be.
But yeah, he wanted to give Linda a sense of Liverpool, and she was just charmed, because of course everywhere he walked, they're all right, La, all right, love your music, gotta get love what you're doing, and so that's the great thing about Liverpool, is because the Beatles are from there, nobody's overwhelmed with the fame. When famous people come, it's not all like, can I get a selfie? They're like, all right, and that's about all you'll get.
That's good.
So yeah, that was a fun day out for sure. What's he saying? You're never too young to be with the family to be at the pub. Exactly. Not in Liverpool. There's no such thing as too young. Back to Dylan for a second.
Yes. In 1961, the New York Times critic described Dylan as a cross between a choir boy and a beatnik. Does he strike you as that?
As either one. Yeah.
Yeah, especially then, he kind of had a baby face, and so he did give off that vibe back then. And right at the same time, that's when the Beatles were at the Cavern, and their first review said something similar, where they said the Beatles never seem to care about the audience reaction, and yet they always say thank you. So it's the same thing, where they're slightly rebellious, but also kind to the audience. And the same with Dylan. He's a beatnik, but he's a choir boy. So they both had both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the dichotomy of those two things in one sentence. It just jumped out to me in your book.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, I mean, do you see yourself continuing to explore music journalism and relationships between, iconic people of an era, of a zeitgeist, or are there other cultural subjects calling you for what do you spiritually feel is your next book, music or not music?
I think really, it's like I said, this is the book I wanted to read, so I was obsessed and had to write it. I don't think I'm going to write another book like this, honestly. So I'm working on a novel, and I might do that. I've written a lot of music journalism. I did a big story for Vanity Fair on the Rufus Wainwright and his family. I've written on Robert Plant for the New Yorker, and Elvis Costello I've interviewed a number of times, and Nick Lowe. But those are all, I don't feel like any of those topics that I want to write a book about. So I think this is probably my only music book, but never say never. Who knows? Unless something grabs, some idea might jump out at me. But this was a very long time obsession that finally I had to do it.
5 years.
So Elvis Costello, of course, famously is another son of a Scouser, another Merseysider.
Yes. And also he's a son of Beatles and Dylan as well in his music. He has both in his music. Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his father was a band leader, wasn't he?
No, he was a drummer in Joe Loss's band.
Oh, he was a drummer in
Joe Loss was the band leader.
Didn't Costello have his own band? I think.
Yes, Ross McManus, he sang with Joe Loss's band.
Right, of course.
Yes. And then there's a British TV commercial you would know better than I do I forget what it's for, and he was the voice of the TV. It's a song. There was a jingle in the 60s for, I think it was some food product that he was Ross McManus, Elvis's father, sang the jingle, which I think a lot of people know him for.
Oh.
I'll have to look that up.
I'll have to look that up.
And interestingly enough, even though, the Elvis Costello that we all know and love was sort of that 80s post-punk, I don't know how you can't really pigeonhole Elvis Costello, can you, from a genre perspective?
Not anymore. Now that he's worked with the Brodsky Quartet and Burt Bacharach and Paul McCartney and everybody, so and he's toured with Bob Dylan and opened for Bob and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's married to Diana Krall, right?
yeah, married to Diana Krall. And I was the editor of two stories Elvis wrote for Vanity Fair. So I asked him to write about the 500 albums you must have, which is still you can find that article online. And Elvis, in addition to being a great songwriter, he's really a great music critic or someone who writes about music really well. And so this article is really fascinating about what he thinks these are the 500 essential albums that everybody must have. So that's a really good piece if you can find it. It's from around 2000.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, just, there's a friend of ours, Charles Rosenet, writes top 10 list books, and he has celebrities top 10, this, that, the other. That would be more of a, a textbook kind of a thing. But wouldn't that be interesting that, to find out what people like Robert Plant, for example, what his top 100 or 500 or 10 would be. Tell me a Robert Plant story, because I'm a bit of a fangirl still.
Oh, there are some people that I've interviewed that you have such a marvelous, I feel like not so much immediate connection, but I just loved being in his presence. And I didn't expect that going into it. I just spent about 2 days with him in New York, and I went to his sound check and hung around with him. And there's something light about his spirit or something. And he was funny in a way I didn't expect. And so what I take away from it is just the mood that I felt being around him, and he's just kind of a surprisingly funny guy. And I don't know, that's all. Just I felt the same way with Nick Lowe. Like they're both they're just charming, just charming people.
Mm-hmm. Light workers, I think we call them, don't we? Just bring up.
Exactly.
They've still got a bit of that. Well, a lot of that old hippie in them that just believes in the best. I've got one here. Every morning, she sends me either a text or an email.
I live downstairs. She lives upstairs in the same house.
Oh, that's nice.
As soon as I wake up.
And poor Martin, my husband of 34 years, deals with all of it.
Yeah. Oh, he's guaranteed a front seat in heaven when he pops off.
Exactly. But she sends me an email
as soon
saying,
as I waken up, I either send one from my cell phone, cell phone, or when I get up and go to the bathroom and go to my computer.
We didn't need the bathroom comment.
All right. I won't tell you anything about my bowels.
She's English. She had to
say bowels.
She had to bring the toilet into it,
It's important to be regular. Yeah.
Oh, it depends.
Oh, see what she did there?
Yeah. No, I send her an email that just says "mup,"
and then something totally irreverent and funny. But there are people that you meet and need in your life that they bring the light. They bring the joy.
Yeah.
Yes, there are scary times. Hello, there are. Nobody's guaranteed a good time until the end. But we all must make the best of what we have every day. And that's what I'm so thankful for all of the people who are listening now and watching now and going to see this, out on the interwebs. Weren't we so lucky to have been born at this little blip in the universe?
Yeah.
Can you imagine being born before fire? Well, being around
Never mind.
Before fire, or in 1,000 years' time when everything's AI,
Yeah, I know.
I think we're such a lucky generation, or our generations, to have been exposed to all this music and all this art. And, yes, I guess mind expanding drugs. I never tried any of that. Wasn't my deal. But when you look at the 40s to maybe to the 90s, that 50-year span of creativity and music, and you said some of the names, Jack Kerouac, and John Lennon and these people, and thank you for taking up such a large part of your life to be passionate about enough to write a book that didn't exist that you wanted to read. That's just that is such a gift, honestly, to this body of work that we've all got to enjoy. It's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to get the story straight. I realized that it hadn't been, just how many times did they meet? What happened? That basic stuff was not had not been written before. So now it's all down and on the page. So.
Well, yeah, and have you ever thought about turning it into some kind of an educational learning curriculum? Because there are lots of universities.
Well, one thing I did speak at a Beatles conference. Do you know Ken Womack?
Yes, very well.
Yeah. So I spoke at a conference of his in Asbury Park where I did a little audio-visual presentation based on parts of my book, and I think I'd like to improve that a little bit and take that on the road if I could, maybe one day. But yes, because it's fun to talk about, and it's nice to hear the music while you're explaining things. So it's a bit like a lecture, but with things to look at. So that would be fun.
I think that's fantastic. I mean, and you've got some incredible, on the back of this book, some incredible testimonials, and one from Jan Wenner, co-founder of Rolling Stone. The friendship between Bob Dylan and the Beatles and how they influenced, competed with, and revered each other is meticulously, which I will agree with, lovingly told in this delightful history of a magical world in an historic era. And, this guy, Jan Wenner, he knows from Rolling Stone. He knows some of this stuff. So Angie and I, 11 thumbs up. Thanks so much to Buzz Bazzini for bringing Jim Windolf into our world. And it's keep doing that whole lecturing thing. If I can help you in any way, I've got some connections. Be happy to carry on the conversation.
All right, that would be great. Get the word out. That would be great.
Absolutely. So you probably don't know this, but Angie one of her books is called Mrs. McCartney's Liverpool Limericks and Other Random Irish Haikus. So we put pen to paper. And if you're sitting comfortably, we will serenade you with our farewell limerick.
So thank you.
And you count it in, madame.
Thank you. 1, 2, 3.
We chatted with author named Jim, whose book holds each musical whim. From the Beatles to Bob, it's a masterful job, and packed with great yarns to the brim. Ta-da!
Don't give up your day job.
Thanks very much.
Fabulous time. Thank you, Jim Windolf. Thank you, Simon & Schuster, for publishing this book. And it's called Where the Music Had to Go, How Bob Dylan and the Beatles Changed Each Other and the World. And you can't call yourself a Beatles collector if you don't have this in your collection. It is fabulous. And we will see you kids all of a sudden next week. Keep your corkscrews handy. Keep your kettles boiling. We'll see you over at mccartney.com. and all of the other places you can find us. And we'll see you kids all of a sudden. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks so much. See you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to TeaFlix, and check out Dr. Angie's books, Organic Teas and CBD, at mrsmccartneysteas.com. Toodle pip.